All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of ICU. Today I have oh my God, Meagan Schwarz,
Yep, exactly how it's spelled. You got it.
Schwarzrock.
Yes.
That's probably the hardest name I've ever said on my podcast in ever. So, anywho, that was a horrible start, but we're gonna roll with it because that's who we are. And Meagan is a pelvic floor physical therapist out of Chicago. So, welcome to ICU, Meagan.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to this literally since we started talking about it on Instagram.
Yes, yes, and we got started on a laugh, so I already know this is going to be a really fun conversation. We aim to entertain here. Do you want to start off by just introducing yourself to the audience?
Yes, absolutely. So I am Meagan Schwarzrock, and that last name is harder to spell, I think, than it is to pronounce. Anyways, I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist. I work primarily with women in particular who are in preconception, pregnancy, or postpartum, helping them stay active through those stages without pelvic symptoms. Um, I'm in Chicago, if I didn't already mention that, and I also work with people or women virtually as well for those, like in rural areas who maybe don't have access to a pelvic floor specialist.
Okay, awesome. And I have been kind of going through your content and your website, and I saw that you have a personal experience with pelvic pain. So, can you share a bit more about that and how you ended up specializing in pelvic health?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to say I've kind of always had pelvic pain since I started menstruating. It's hard to tell because basically, as soon as I started menstruating, you hit puberty, I had bad acne. I went on the birth control pill essentially right away. And the couple of periods I had before going on the pill, I had very debilitating menstrual cramps. Long story short, I go on the pill almost immediately, and I was on it for, oh my gosh, maybe like 7, 8 years, and all seemed fine. I went off of it just because I didn't like how it made me feel and switched forms, tried an IUD, tried without. And then I would say within the last 3, 4 years, that's when I really started to have like pelvic pain to the point where it was impacting my daily life and getting in the way of being able to do things. Some of my favorite things like A, travel, and B, play beach volleyball. Um, how it got me into pelvic floor physical therapy. So when I was in grad school, or let me backtrack a little bit. Before I even got into physical therapy school, I didn't know that pelvic floor physical therapy was even a thing. Like most women have no idea that that's even a thing. And I was like, wow, this is so fascinating, especially because I kind of knew that there was something just felt off. And the OB-GYN could never really put their I don't know. I just never got answers from the OB-GYN. They would just kind of send me on their way, say like everything looked fine. I would get labs and a pelvic ultrasound. Everything appeared to be fine. And so once I got to grad school and learned pelvic floor physical therapy was a thing, it's like, oh, this is amazing. And I would love to be able to help more women because it just sucks to leave a medical doctor's office and not have answers and just think like, okay, maybe I'm making stuff up. I don't know. Maybe this is normal. And so once I got to PT school, I learned pelvic floor therapy was a thing, and just having a background of pelvic floor dysfunction, I knew that I wanted to be able to help more women and just kind of be that person that would validate them and reassure them that, hey, that there is something you can do about this. Um, and yeah, now we're here. Now I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist helping women through exactly what I've gone through. I haven't had kids myself. It is something I plan to do in the future. And I want, speaking from experience, like pelvic pain, generally just like the thought of pregnancy and a birth is kind of terrifying, even though I'm a pelvic floor therapist and I help women through it all the time. But just having a background of pelvic pain, that kind of stuff can like freak you out. And so I really am interested in helping women through their pregnancy journeys also so they can ease some of their anxieties and also have a smoother pregnancy experience with less aches and pains, a smoother delivery and better postpartum recovery. And so, yeah, I really like helping that population on top of just in women or in general women dealing with pelvic pain.
That's awesome. I love hearing people's personal stories and how they landed in this position. And I swear, every pelvic PT we have on the show, it's always like, I didn't expect to be here, but blah, blah, blah. So it's just
Yeah,
funny.
yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
you and I were talking before we kind of scheduled this recording, and we were just thinking, like, okay, what topic haven't we covered before on the podcast relating to the pelvic floor or anything that's relevant for my audience? And we kind of landed on the topic of hormones and the pelvic
Mhm.
floor. And I feel like hormones specifically are just, in terms of the interstitial cystitis community, it's such a hot topic because there's a lot of people who notice their symptoms either improving or getting worse at certain times of the month. And so I've had a Eurogyne come on before to explain her take on everything, but I'd love to talk to you about it from a pelvic floor perspective. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm really excited about that.
Yes, yes. So I I mean, I'm excited too because I have personal experience with this. So my pelvic pain is very cyclical, which just means it there's certain times of the month, right, with hormone fluctuations that can impact how we perceive our pain. And maybe during certain times of the month, we're in less pain, certain times of the month, we're in more pain. And so I'm also very excited to talk about this because I feel like a lot of women, like, yes, we know that we can have menstrual cramps, and that's like essentially a normal part of being a female. However, debilitating menstrual cramps, that's not normal. Pain outside of your period, also not necessarily normal. And if it is cyclical, there are ways you can definitely help to like reduce the impact that your hormones are essentially having on your pain perception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would love to hear from you, like, how much of our pelvic floor health is influenced by hormones? Like, how big of a role does it play?
Yeah, so I feel like hormones are sometimes like a buzzword too. You know, like everyone's like, because they're so complex and hard to understand, it can, I mean, speaking from my own personal experience, before I became a pelvic floor physical therapist, and when I would go to the doctor and they wouldn't give me answers, I'd be like, oh, something must be off with my hormones. Like it's just so, I feel like they're easy to blame, and yes, they have a role for sure, but they're just like one piece of the puzzle, right? There's so much more to our body and to our pelvic health other than hormones. Hormones are one piece and they're important, but then we also have to think about our nervous system. Are we chronically stressed? That impacts our pelvic health. What about our hip mobility, our spine mobility, our pelvic floor function and coordination, what you eat, your hydration levels, aging, like all of these things play a role, and hormones are one piece of the puzzle. So I'm excited to talk more about hormones because I feel like they're the hardest one to understand out of all of those. But yes, they have a big role, but at the end of the day, they're not the only thing impacting our pelvic health.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the role of the nervous system. And it made me want to
Mhm.
clarify because there are stress hormones, and
Yep.
then there's sex hormones like your estrogen and
Mhm.
progesterone. And then I don't know, what
Mhm.
other hormones are there?
There's a lot. So I'm not an endocrinologist or anything like that, but in terms of like our talk today, I think it would be great to like hone down on estrogen and progesterone because they, and I'm probably going to butcher progesterone. It's such a tongue twister. But, but I feel like those will be great ones to focus on for this topic because there are so many hormones and it could be so easy to just be like, okay, cortisol levels, all of these things, and it's a lot. But in terms of pelvic health, estrogen, progesterone, super impactful on our pelvic health.
I just got like weird PTSD from like college science class. Like, I don't know, was it biology that I learned that stuff or anatomy? I don't know, but I don't want to think about it anymore.
They're so complicated. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot of things that impact your pelvic health, but all of those things I just mentioned also impact your hormones too. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very complicated.
Oh, yes. So, how do these two hormones we're going to talk about, the estrogen and progesterone, how do they play a role in bladder symptoms like pain, frequency, and urgency?
Yes, that's a great question. So essentially, estrogen's main role is it helps to maintain like elasticity and strength of our pelvic tissues. That would mean your pelvic floor muscles and also the lining of your bladder. There's a muscle in there called the detrusor. Um, we don't have to go too in depth on that, but what that muscle helps with your bladder is it helps to stretch it so that it can fill with urine. Now, if there is something going on with estrogen, maybe there's decreased estrogen levels, that could impact your pelvic health in terms of weakened pelvic floor muscles, decreased ability for your pelvic floor to stretch, decreased ability for your bladder to stretch and fill with urine. And maybe I should sort of go back a little bit. Your pelvic floor and how it impacts your bladder. Your pelvic floor provides support to your pelvic organs, including your bladder, uterus, and rectum. So your bladder is also suspended by ligaments. However, if your pelvic floor is weak or it's not providing the support from below to your bladder, then that can also impact your bladder function. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I'm glad you
And
gave
then,
that review,
go
but
ahead.
because we've had episodes where we've talked about it, but if someone's just tuning into this one, I'm glad that you reviewed
Right.
it.
Cool, cool. And then in terms of progesterone, gosh, that's so hard to say.
That's like me
Like,
with
how
your
many
last
times?
name.
Yeah, literally. Like, how many times am I gonna have to say this hormone throughout this? Hopefully, by the end of this, I can say it properly. Um, that hormone helps to relax the detrusor muscle, so the muscle in your bladder. And the function of that muscle, right, it helps your bladder stretch to fill with urine, but also it contracts to help you get urine out of your bladder. So it might be easy to think like, oh, that's a good thing that it helps your bladder relax to a point, right? Like if there's too much and it's helping your that muscle relax too much, what that can lead to is overfilling of the bladder and that muscle not being able to help get urine out, which right can lead to urine retention and urgency, etc.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to talk about like the different life stages with women
Yeah.
and reproduction and all of that because we have the women who are like pre-menopause. I don't know. What do you call that? Is it perimenopause?
Perimenopause.
But does that count if you're like someone like me who's 29? Am I in perimenopause?
No, no, no. So it would be like you're entering menopause.
So what
So
am I
you're
considered?
oh, now I'm confused.
Oh my God. We're
ChatGPT,
thinking
I should
too
know
hard into
this.
it. No, no. It's like when you think about something too long or too hard and you're like, I forget.
Wait, okay. Like you're in your reproductive years.
I'm in my reproductive years. I like that.
Can we go with that?
Yeah, yeah, we can roll with reproductive years. So, and I'm just thinking of like the women I work with who are in maybe like I don't know, 20s to 30s, and then you have the people who are approaching menopause, are in menopause, and
Mhm.
then are post-menopause. So like what do the hormone fluctuations look like for all of these different groups?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. Um,
Yeah.
but a good one. So, where to begin? Let's start with women in their reproductive years, women who are menstruating. Um, and we can break it down by like just looking at the menstrual cycle in particular. And so during the menstrual cycle, and right, I could make this super complicated. Like you got all of the phases of the menstrual cycle. Let's just break it down into first half and second half. So the first half of your menstrual cycle, which is the follicular phase, leading up to day of ovulation, which would essentially be the halfway point of your menstrual cycle, right? So that first half, your estrogen levels are higher, they're rising, which can be a good thing because estrogen helps it helps your bladder be able to stretch. It helps um, with pelvic floor elasticity and strength. And so what that could what I'm getting at with this is I'm thinking from like a pelvic floor physical therapy standpoint, and pelvic pain is, let's say you have pain with intercourse or just general pelvic pain. The first half of your cycle might be a good time to be intimate because your pelvic floor is going to be able to stretch, and that's fantastic. And then when we think about the second half of our menstrual cycle, which would be the luteal phase, now that is when progesterone is rising. And if we think back to what progesterone does, it helps to relax the detrusor muscle, the muscle of your bladder. So if there is too much progesterone, it's going to allow your bladder to fill. It might get to the point where it feels overfilled, like increasing the bladder's capacity and decreasing its ability to empty. So urinary retention, urinary urgency, stuff like that. Now, going outside of the menstrual cycle into pregnancy, we have higher levels of progesterone throughout pregnancy. So it can lead to all of those things we just talked about. And then we go into the postpartum phase. And in postpartum, if you're breastfeeding or pumping, you have higher levels of prolactin, but we also have lower levels of estrogen.
Shoot, can you hear that?
Yeah, yeah. It stopped. It just stopped though. Is it still
No, but
going
he's
on your
like
end?
still going. Oh my God.
Well, it only went in for like a brief second, so I think we're fine.
Okay.
Um,
Let me know. Be honest if it gets
okay.
bad.
I will. I will. In terms of postpartum, now you have lower estrogen levels because you might be breastfeeding or pumping, and also it's just like your body's natural physiological response to postpartum, lower estrogen levels. If we have lower estrogen levels, remember estrogen kind of acts as this like protective hormone to our pelvic tissues that can lead to symptoms like frequency, urgency, waking up in the night to go to the bathroom, maybe more discomfort and pain. But then that also happens in perimenopause and menopause. We have lowering estrogen levels. And estrogen, again, kind of acts as this like protective hormone to our pelvic tissues, which why women in perimenopause and menopause are usually just at higher risk or more susceptible to pelvic floor dysfunction because of this lowering of estrogen. Now, it's not the only thing, right? There's aging, there's other things involved in that, but it is one of the reasons why they're at higher risk of pelvic floor dysfunction.
Got it. That was a lot. I'm I'm digesting all of that, but I did have a question that I wanted to ask you because there's people with IC and I'm sure like OAB as well who
Mhm.
their symptoms tend to disappear when they get pregnant. What would be the explanation for that, or what could be a possible explanation for that, let's say, in terms of like a hormone or pelvic floor standpoint?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And it's so let's talk about the anatomy and physiology, which where this might be like, how could the symptoms disappear when you think of the anatomy and physiology, which is now you have a baby growing inside of your uterus. Uterus is expanding, because baby's inside, puts more weight and pressure on the bladder. Bladder has less room to fill. Now there's less capacity. So how, by any means, could those symptoms disappear? They also see this in women who have endometriosis, where they notice that there's a improvement in symptoms when they're pregnant. They also see this in women with MS, multiple sclerosis, um, where their symptoms disappear. I even in grad school had this, she wasn't my patient. She was like a case study of our PT classes. She had MS. She wasn't able or was she was wheelchair bound, unable to walk, but when she was pregnant was able to walk. And like all of her MS symptoms essentially went into remission. Didn't disappear, right? That's not how it works with MS. It goes into remission. And it's so fascinating. And when it comes to this stuff, at least from my understanding, is your body is trying to do something incredible. And now it's like we're growing a human. So we're going to make sure that you are like at full capacity and however that is, right? To be able to put your energy into growing this human because your body essentially like I want to say like shifts into this like motherhood mode of like I'm going to protect my baby and grow my baby. And I think I that is kind of what is happening because when you think of the anatomy of it, it just like doesn't really make sense, right? But they've noticed it with other conditions like endo and MS where a lot of the symptoms kind of are at bay when women get pregnant.
It's the least our bodies could do while we're going through all that crap.
Yum. Yep, exactly.
I'm just thinking too, because I've also heard on the flip side where people's symptoms get worse. So
Yep.
I wonder if that could be like a hormonal shift.
Yeah, it very well could be. And when, like, think of, so because progesterone is much, much higher in pregnancy and continues to rise. And that hormone in particular, I feel like when we think of like pregnancy in general, but even just with our menstrual cycles, it's higher in the second half of our menstrual cycle. What do most people tend to experience in the second half of their menstrual cycle? Pelvic pain and discomfort, tension in their pelvic floor muscles. And that's where like okay all of these urinary urgency, all of these symptoms that we experience in the second half of our menstrual cycles because there's higher levels of progesterone, there's also higher levels of that in pregnancy. So all of that to say, I think it's just very person dependent, all of this stuff is, and how your body responds. Not everyone's symptoms are hormone dependent, and if your body doesn't have cyclical symptoms, then maybe in pregnancy, when there are higher levels of progesterone, your body doesn't necessarily respond to that in a way that someone else's body might, if that makes sense.
It honestly pisses me off when people tell me that their doctor told them to just get pregnant and hope that their
Yeah,
symptoms go away. Have you heard that before?
yeah, I have from clients, and it's uber frustrating. Also, like, what? That's like, what? How could you be like, yeah, just go get pregnant? Like,
Easy
what the
peasy.
heck? Yeah,
And like,
no.
I've also heard of people getting recommended to get a hysterectomy too because it
Yeah.
might help you. It's like, what?
Right.
Based
Yeah. If
on
you don't,
what?
yeah, it's so tough because I have worked with clients who have had a hysterectomy. They were totally fine never having kids, or maybe they're already like past their reproductive years and they have a hysterectomy and yeah, their symptoms disappear. That's great for them, probably because a large part of their symptoms were hormonal based. But like we said in the beginning of this call, there's so many other things that impact your symptoms besides hormones. Like hormones have a big component, yes, depending on the person. And if just going straight to a hysterectomy without exhausting, okay, what's happening at the nervous system? What's your pelvic floor doing? What, like, what are all of the, are you chronically stressed? Like, if we don't first exhaust those options, it just, yeah, it's wild to me that someone would be like, let's cut it out.
Let's
Nuts.
get her out of there. Oh, it's so frustrating. And I've heard a decent amount of people whose symptoms got worse after they got a hysterectomy. And if somebody were to do that solely just to see if it would help their bladder symptoms, like that would be devastating for me.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to the anatomy, if you, and right, there's how much are they essentially removing with the hysterectomy, right? There's different variations to that. But at any point when you're adjusting the pelvic anatomy that you've had for however many years you've been alive, there's going to be a shift in that support system. And your bladder is butted up against the uterus. If we all of a sudden now remove part of that organ, it can have an impact on how your bladder functions, right? There's going to be a shift.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so you kind of took us through the hormone shifts that occur, or at least the normal hormone fluctuations in people. What did we call me?
Reproductive
Reproduction,
years.
golden years.
We gotta look that. I'm gonna look that up after this and think, wow, I
Oh my
can't
God.
believe I like had such big of a brain fart. I like,
We talked about that. Did you get into the like menopause side of things? Like what happens then?
yeah, a little bit. So the main takeaway is like there's lowering estrogen as you go into menopause, and what can happen with less estrogen is, right, your bladder doesn't have as much of a capacity to fill. You have weakening support from your pelvic tissues. That can lead to pelvic tightness and tension. It can also lead to vaginal atrophy and dryness down there. So if you notice things like pain with intimacy, that could be because of lowering estrogen levels. Again, not the only cause, but could be one of the contributors. What else? It can put you at increased risk of UTIs. Estrogen is, like I said, it's like the protective pelvic health hormone in a way, and it's very important for your microbiome and keeping it healthy. And so, yeah, there, like if you're starting to experience symptoms as you're entering menopause that you never experienced before, like big part of it could be the drop in estrogen. So,
Hmm. Yeah, and the treatment for that is usually like some sort of hormone replacement therapy, right?
yeah. And that I so I've worked with clients in this population, and yes, we have to work on, so the estrogen cream is usually what they would be prescribed, and or yeah, HRT. And it can be really great, especially from a vaginal dryness standpoint, because your body essentially loses some of its ability to produce natural lubrication. And so that can be great for keeping the vaginal tissues like pliable and plump, so to speak. But then, yeah, from like the pelvic floor muscles becoming weaker and maybe a little bit more tense, that's where it could be very beneficial to work on actually implementing like movements for your pelvic floor, work on the flexibility, work on the strength in conjunction with HRT.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. I'm trying to think of how we can relate this to my audience. And I would think like, okay, there's probably a subgroup of people who have no idea what's triggering their symptoms. Everything feels
Mhm.
random. And I mean, it could be a couple different things. It could be nervous system related, but it could be hormone related. So, do you typically have people keep track of their menstrual cycle if they're not sure?
Yes, absolutely. I think tracking your menstrual cycle, if you have a menstrual cycle,
Yes.
is very, very, very beneficial. It's something I do. I've been doing it literally for years, and I like to say it's your fifth vital sign because it gives a lot of insight. If you do have cyclical pain or cyclical symptoms, right? Whether it's overactive bladder or IC, um, tracking your menstrual cycle would give you a lot of insight into, okay, when I do have these hormone fluctuations, what's happening? And what that might look like is first figuring out, when do you feel symptoms throughout the month? And it'll probably take at least a few months for you to notice a pattern, if there is a pattern. If there isn't a pattern, maybe it's not hormone related. So if there is a pattern, great. Okay, now you have something to work with. From there, once you start to realize where that might be, and for me in particular, again, it's very individualized, it's very personalized, but me and a lot of women notice that during ovulation and a few days leading up to menstruation are typically when symptoms are can be increased, so to say. Um, But once you have that, you'll start to learn what your body needs more of during those times and maybe what it needs less of during those times. And so, AKA, like what triggers your symptoms and what gets you out of a flare. And now that you know the pattern, now that you know what helps your body, what doesn't help it, then what I would recommend is, okay, if during a few days before I menstruate, I like the last 3 months I've looked at this and I tend to have an increase in urgency. I tend to have an increase in pelvic discomfort. And you recognize that pattern, instead of waiting for those symptoms to hit, you can be proactive with it and start a few days before, maybe start a week before. If it's something easy that you found helps, maybe diaphragmatic breathing helps, maybe drinking lots of water helps. Those are easy things you can do throughout your entire menstrual cycle to constantly just stay proactive with it. And you don't have to overcomplicate it, but just seeing the pattern and picking 1 to 2 things that are easy to implement into your routine before the symptoms help or start can really go a long ways.
I think that's really empowering. Like when you're aware of your symptoms and you feel like you have control, or at least more
Mhm.
control than you did when you knew like less. I also
Mhm.
think that keeping track of your menstrual cycle or just keeping track of anything, whether it's stress or food or whatever, in a lot of cases, it can be so helpful in identifying patterns, and that helps you feel more informed. And then you can bring
Mhm.
that data to your doctor or to some
Yep.
practitioner that you can come up with a solution for. It's like that's a really liberating feeling once you have that aha moment of like, okay, this is it.
Mhm.
Now we can create a plan. Whereas if you don't know, if you're just going through life and you have no idea what's going to trigger you next, I feel like that adds a lot of fear and paranoia and just confusion overall.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest like complaints of people dealing with these symptoms, whether you have overactive bladder, IC, endometriosis, just general pelvic pain, is the unpredictability of your symptoms. And it can feel very just like scary to be in your own body, not knowing when you might go into a flare. And by tracking your cycle, if it is cyclical, that can help give some predictability to it. And it also help give you back some control to be like, okay, I know at this date in general, I might have these symptoms. So I'm going to do this to kind of counteract that.
hmm Yeah, I love getting people at least a little bit of control back because being out of
Mhm.
control is, in my opinion, the worst feeling in the world.
Yeah, especially for those type A people out there, you know?
All of us perfectionists, people pleasers, like we just,
Yep.
oh, we marinate in that discomfort.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear more about the role that you play, or just pelvic floor PTs, the role that you can play in somebody who's having these cyclical symptoms. Like, I don't know how you can really explain it, but like you could kind of take us through like a potential interaction with a patient or something. I don't know. Do your best.
Okay, where do we want to go with this? Um, I'll pretend to treat myself.
Okay.
So I this doesn't have to be perfect. I'll be my own case study. So dealing with pelvic symptoms, and so I don't have IC or overactive bladder that I'm aware of. However, I do have symptoms that correlate with it. I have urgency that is cyclical. I have urinary retention that is cyclical. And that's why a lot of these conditions, now I'm going off on a tangent. A lot of these conditions are hard to diagnose because they overlap. Um, Anywho, for the past 3 to 4 years, right, I have been tracking my cycle. And that is honestly where I would start. If I was coming to a pelvic, or to me as a pelvic floor physical therapist, very first day, it's trying to figure out, okay, what does your body like and what doesn't it like? And for everyone, that's going to be a little bit different. So in the beginning, it might be a little bit of an exploration process to see what those are. For some people, triggers could be, I don't know, wine. For other people, wine doesn't do anything to them, and it's totally fine to keep drinking wine. For others, sitting might be a trigger. And for others, it might be their hormones. And then in terms of what makes it better, I mean, in general, right, movement tends to make things better, but figuring out what makes your symptoms better, and now you have that. That's kind of like put that in your back pocket, and now we're going to track your cycle. We're tracking your cycle to see if there's a cyclical component to your symptoms. If we find that there is a pattern that, okay, on let's just pretend ovulation and a few days before your menstrual cycle or before you menstruate, your symptoms increase. Okay, there might be a cyclical component here. Now you can take the things that make it better and start to use those throughout. Um, but outside of that, we also have to figure out, other than there being a hormone component to it, there's other things that go into play too. And so we're not going to do this all in one visit because that would be super duper overwhelming. But we might see if there's a nervous system component. Often there is, especially if symptoms have been present for a long time. There tends to be some form of nervous system dysregulation. And so figuring that out, and okay, what are some stress management techniques or some ways we can make your body essentially feel safe, or make you feel safe in your body again. And then we're also going to, I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist. So our like main thing is looking at the body and looking at how it's moving. So we're going to see if there's a component there impacting your symptoms as well. And hopefully this isn't sounding too overwhelming, but it's not like we would do all of that in one visit, but we're trying to essentially narrow down on there's all these things that could be impacting your symptoms. What are the things? Because likely not all of them are, right? What are the things impacting it? And then we'll start with one and kind of just like focus on making those better. So for me in particular, I know my pain is cyclical. I know stress impacts it. And I know there's a musculoskeletal component, which just means there's a dysfunction in the muscles and the joints, so to speak, which is standard physical therapy, right? And so now that I know that those are the three main things that impact my symptoms, I can then go and work on those things. And we've already talked about how we would treat it from like tracking your hormones, but there's so many things that impact your hormones, right? Like what you eat, what like your stress, all of this, but they all intermix, which is a good thing. So if we're working on tracking and finding a pattern to stay in control, great. If it's stress management, okay, let's implement stress management techniques. And then if there's a musculoskeletal component, okay, let's figure out what's going on. Is your pelvic floor tight or weak? Is your spine lacking mobility somewhere? Or your hips lacking mobility? Is there weakness in your hips? And just fine tuning to figure out what you have to focus on in particular, versus trying all of the things. We're just trying to figure out essentially what your root cause slash causes are to your symptoms.
Yeah, you're kind of peeling the onion.
Yes. That was a much better way to put it than
You're peeling the
my long description.
every time I think of the concept of peeling an onion, I think of the scene in Shrek where he's
Mhm,
like, onions have layers. And I just,
mhm.
it's stuck in my brain forever.
Yes. Yes. Yes, that is the perfect words to describe my long explanation.
Oh, yes. But I'm really glad that you brought up the nervous system component. And
Mhm.
like, guys, I swear I did not tell Megan to say that. I didn't even say like, hey, let's talk about this on the show. Like, no. And I'm saying that because there's, I mean, I think it's a hard concept to wrap your mind around. And I've talked about this so much on the podcast, so I'll keep this short.
Mhm,
But it's like sometimes it takes person after person after person to come on here and tell you your nervous system is playing a role, most likely,
mhm,
to
mhm,
actually believe it. So I hope
mhm.
Megan is the 24th person to come on here and talk to you guys about the freaking nervous system.
And I think it's hard to comprehend, or it's hard to comprehend, kind of just like our hormones in a way where it's like, like, is that really impacting it? And sometimes it can sound a little woo-woo, like you're telling me I'm making this up, which is not at all what we're saying, right? What's really happening from a nervous system component is it's just like your body's warning system, and it's a survival mechanism there to protect you, and it thinks something is going wrong, so it's going to signal to you pain to get you to do something different. But what happens over time? So if we think of like stepping on a Lego, if you step on a Lego, it hurts, right? Like that it, and then your nervous system, your brain and spinal cord pick up on that. And they're like, well, that didn't serve you any good. So the next time you step on a Lego, I'm going to make sure that hurts a little bit more. And then you go and step on the Lego and it's like, ooh, ow, that really hurt. And time after time after time, if you keep stepping on that Lego, your nervous system is going to make sure it hurts to the point where you don't ever step on that Lego again. And that's what can happen with these, I hate to say chronic conditions, but it's like these things that have, I see overactive bladder, endometriosis, our body, it's literally just our nervous system trying to tell you, hey, something is going on here and you need to pay attention to it. And if our nervous system is dysregulated, for lack of better terms, it might start to then perceive that pain more intensely, stepping on the Lego multiple times, so that you get whatever it is out, but you can't, right? It's your bladder. You can't just rip your bladder out. That's not going to solve the issue. And yeah, I don't know if that made it clear or just less clear.
You just started talking about Legos, and I was like, I can't remember ever stepping on a Lego, but I can only imagine.
I think I don't remember who told me that analogy. It was probably one of my mentors when we were just talking about chronic pelvic pain, and it's, yeah, your nervous system becomes heightened to the sensations that your bladder, your uterus, whatever it is trying to tell you.
Hmm. My old IC doctor would say that the dial on my nervous system was turned up. And I was like, that
Yeah,
makes perfect sense. I'm so sensitive to everything.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you
Like
for that.
the light switch. Yeah, the light switch analogy. That's a good one too.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Well, yeah, that's a really helpful way to explain it. Is there anything else you want to discuss when it comes to hormones and or the pelvic floor?
Um, I mean, like we've kind of already alluded to, they're important, but they're just one piece of the puzzle. So try not to go down the rabbit hole of just like, it's my hormones, it's my hormones, it's my hormones. It's maybe
Okay,
one
TV
piece of the
timeout.
puzzle, and
I lost connection. Can you just start that sentence over again?
yes, yes, yes.
Thank-
Am I back?
Yeah, 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 we're back. Sorry.
Cool. Cool. I think just understanding hormones are important, and tracking your cycle, can help you determine if there is a cyclical component to your symptoms, but they are just one piece of the puzzle, and not to focus solely on them. At the end of the day, if we just think about being healthy overall, getting in daily movement, focusing on eating good foods, that also impacts your hormones. And so if there is a hormone component to your symptoms, if you just focus on being healthy overall, and I know that really, really simplifies it, but at the end of the day, it can be so easy with the right, we're type A, we're a perfectionist, we have these symptoms, to then like go down the rabbit hole of being so specific with the things we do, which can also get to a point where it's a little counterintuitive. And just kind of pulling back and being like, okay, I'm going to move my body today. I'm going to eat something healthy. And in general, that's, it's going to help.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Okay, cool. So if somebody's listening and they're in the Chicago area, how can they work with you? Are you taking on new clients right now?
I am. So if they want to go to my Instagram, which is at the Pelvic Confidence doc, in my link in bio, you can book a free consultation call through there, or if you'd rather just chat through the DMs first, that's okay too. And I work with women in Chicago. However, if you're not in Chicago and you want to work with me 100% virtually, we can go that route as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Megan. This was a really awesome conversation. And if anybody has questions about anything we talk about, just let us know. Send me a DM after we release this episode, and I'm sure we'll be happy to follow up with you. So thanks, Megan.
Yes, thanks for having me, Callie. Thank you.